Thank you for that. So the lightning talks were designed to keep everyone awake after lunch. I hope it's not my role to bring people back to reality. So I'm doing, I can figure this out. I'm here to talk about two related topics. The first one is about integrated vegetation management at an external engagement that was implemented at BG&E. And the second part of my talk is about the recent ANSI Part 7 integrated vegetation management changes that were recently implemented. Caveat, I am retired from BGE, and this presentation represents what BGE has done in the past and doesn't imply what they may be doing now or going forward, what they might be doing. Quickly, just give you a quick overview of what Baltimore Gas Electric is. So you see Baltimore City in the center of the map. Pennsylvania is the line just above the service territory. The environmentally sensitive Chesapeake Bay is the water you see on the right, and then Washington, D.C. to the southwest is situated just outside the territory. BG&E is the oldest gas utility in the country, founded in 1816 by Rembrandt Peale. It has about 1.25 million electric customers and about 650,000 gas customers, and about 2,300 square miles of electric service territory and about 800 square miles of gas service territory. It has about 530 right-of-way miles from electric transmission lines, 10,500 acres approximately, and 170 miles of gas transmission over high-pressure distribution. That's about 1,000 acres. Historically, BG has mowed all the rights of way annually. Every place they could get a mower, that's how they manage the right of way. Sometimes in residential areas, they might mow more frequently, up to 3 to 5 times a year. Where they couldn't mow, they run a 5-year herbicide treatment cycle, and systematically manage danger trees off the right of way. So, and throughout most of the system, so the trees can't fall into the lines during the 5-year cycle. What I'm going to jump into now is talking about implementing what I call chemically facilitated IVM on the BG transmission system. On the left is what a right-of-way would typically look like after an annual mowing, and on the right would be one that was what would look like it was mowed more frequently. So, the formative years of BGE, the formative years of integrated vegetation management, for a number of years, I contemplated ways to implement IVM on the system. And because of maybe some resistance up top and not having a good business case to sell the program, and also with the people who worked out in the field, they weren't really interested in implementing IVM. They had issues. It was mowing's easy, mowing's wall-to-wall, covers everything, doesn't require a lot of thought process. So in 2003, the Northeast blackout occurred. 2007, the feds implemented standards, reliability standards, that would fine utilities for not meeting certain reliability goals. That was in June, I believe, of 2007, and in August of 2007, a line sagged into a tree on the BG system, and we had the honor of being the first utility in the country to be fined under the new regulations. That was $185,000 and really got off kind of mercifully because it was the first fine. Nonetheless, we embarked on a reclamation program and trying to go around our system to take care of all the trees that had seeded in, that had grown in from the side, that we trimmed around road screens because people like road screens. And like other utilities around the country, they did the same thing. And doing that, we got a lot of people upset. So not in the interest of not letting a good crisis go unwasted, so here's an example. There are two places I'm going to talk about initially. One's the South River Greenway, which is an over 10,000 acre environmental area that's not far from the Capitol in Annapolis, in Maryland. And you can see there were road screens there. We cut down the tall growing trees that had been trimmed, some of them trimmed before, some of them would be trimmed in the future. We left the logs and branches on the ground to mitigate erosion, but very unsightly. And we did all this, I might add, without talking to people in advance. And the mentality was, and a lot of utilities had the same mentality: hey, we own the right of way. We don't need to talk to anyone. It's an emergency. We got fined. We need to go out and take care of our system. The other area that we ran afoul was in a high dollar, highly educated demographic in Columbia, Maryland, between Baltimore and Washington. And we really got people upset with us there. And they had a citizens environmental committee. They energized the environmental committee to sort of combat us. It was very contentious in the beginning, but we ended up having periodic meetings. This went on for over a year. We agreed to bring in a mutually agreed upon consultant. For those of you who know Rick Johnstone from IVM Partners, Rick came in to help bridge the gap because he was respected in the industry. We did a lot of outreach to the community. We met with the health department to talk about the potential herbicides and talk about ways we could implement IVM because it was deemed to be more environmentally friendly. So over a period of a year, we ended up, and this group kept getting back to the community, giving them feedback, and we ended up having one big final community association meeting. And the beauty of it all was that it was not me standing up there. It was not my governmental affairs rep or my vice president. It was the community group who was from the community who got up and presented the case to them. Extraordinarily powerful. When you're not presenting a case, but the community does it, that just worked out very well. And the woman who led that group, Elaine Pardo, we were sort of each other's throats early on, and now we are the best of friends. We have lunch together, and Elaine goes out and talks about IVM and the wonders of it. She's an Audubon Society member, and she's been part of the bird studies that we've done out there, and just become a great convert and a great advocate for the process. This, you saw the ugly site on South River Greenway. This is a few years later. This is what it looks like now. Admittedly, it's during the growing season, but nonetheless, it's greened up. It's got a lot of nice pollinator-friendly plants, and the soil stabilized really well. The South River Greenway it's a group. Again, there were a lot of people, a lot of passers-by who saw the work who got upset. But the South River Greenway people, one of the principal members was Rich Mason from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's a research biologist, field biologist. And Rich was a great advocate for this, and he's still a great advocate and really helped us implement IVM on the South River Greenway, and it's going great guns right now. So I talked about all the work we did in Columbia with the outreach and the community presenting the case to the larger community, the environmental group we worked with. There's a walking path, a pedestrian path that goes along the right-of-way and through the right-of-way. This is a suburban area. And once we were done, you can see the guys with the backpack sprayers implementing the IVM system. And it was a non-event. People walked by, people were spraying herbicides. They knew what was going on. They didn't have any issues. It really was. We were a little nervous about it, but it worked out extremely well. So we decided to tackle the Patuxent Wildlife Refuge, or the Research Refuge, which is a fish and wildlife facility. It's about 13,000 acres, situated between Washington and Baltimore, a little closer to Washington. It's a beautiful area with mostly with forest and fields. It's where they were until recently, where they were breeding whooping cranes. They do sandhill cranes, and they also had the California condor breeding program there. And we had managed this right away with the old former refuge biologist would only let us use one herbicide, Garlon 4, applied by basal treatments. And over a period of about 10 years, 15 years, it really didn't control anything, and it was a terrible mess, and it was a reliability nightmare. It wasn't providing the best environmental benefit. We tried to change the practice as well. Rich Mason, back to him with the South River Greenway, the fish and wildlife field biologist. Rich was he bridged the gap. There was a new refuge manager, Brad Knudsen. Rich introduced us to him. We had an office meeting. We had a field meeting in the course of 2 hours, and a handshake and a verbal promise. We started the conversion of a 5-mile right-of-way through Patuxent into integrated vegetation management. We also talked about research. We talked about doing other things I'll talk about in a bit. So this is what it looked like before, and this might not do it justice. This is before we started the integrated vegetation management. This is largely what it looks like now, and there's variability through there, but we have it under control, and there's research that is that's going on at Patuxent, bird research, there's pollinator research through the USGS, who's on the Patuxent property. There's also New Jersey Institute of Technology has research going on with pollinator research that we expanded not only from Patuxent, we expanded into the Columbia site and the South River Greenway. Our IVM consultant, Rick Johnstone, he did, with his field biologist, did cover type survey, change surveys to see how the vegetation changed over time. And probably, I think it was about a 6-year period that he did the study. Dr. Anand Prasad from Davie is 2 years ago, he started research on soil microbes, plant cover, insects, and a host of other things. And then the 3 sites collectively, South River Greenway, Columbia, and Patuxent, we classified as the pilot sites. And since then, we've implemented operational sites around our system. Total of starting out with 0, went from 0 to 2,200 acres in the course of about 8 or 9 years. And so there's 2,200 acres under integrated vegetation management, and there's probably we could probably convert easily up to 5,000 acres with, I don't call it low-hanging fruit, but it probably wouldn't be extraordinarily difficult, and maybe a couple thousand other acres that could potentially be converted over time. So these pilot sites are situated near Washington, D.C. and the capital of Annapolis. So really was conducive to bringing regulators out to see what integrated vegetation management is about. We brought, and Rick Johnstone facilitated these tours, brought out people from the EPA, people from Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Park Service, the Public Service Commission. The tours were favorably received. It worked out real well, and I'll get into that in a little bit. We put out educational signage on the walking path in Columbia, and based on the study so far, the biodiversity has increased, particularly for pollinators, and we are managing invasive plants at various levels, at least down to the low roar in some of the sites. The gentleman to the right is Rick Johnstone leading this tour. Next to him, I mentioned Rich Mason from the Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's next to him. That's really powerful when you have someone from an agency who's out advocating on this. And again, there were regulators, there were people from other utilities here. They were very well received. I talked about the signage from Columbia. We have 8 or 9 signs along the pathway that represent what's going on at that site environmentally. As succession transforms, those signs can be redone and changed out to reflect what's happening currently. And as an outgrowth of this, the state regulators who were on the tour, on a couple of the tours, they were so impressed with what they saw. We have to go through licensing for new rights-of-way construction or rebuilds on transmission lines. Now, when you go for a license for electric transmission in Maryland, you have to agree to implement IVM as part of your vegetation management practices. So if it's an existing right-of-way, you're doing a rebuild, it's not a new right-of-way, you have to convert that to IVM if you're mowing it, or if you're not, or if you're just spraying it under willy-nilly. They elected to do that. BGE implemented 2 projects under the licensing process. We were happy to do that, and they've been well received. We have our first gas right-of-way in the pipeline, so to speak, to convert to IVM. That's in Baltimore City. And then because of the work we've done, we've acquired Wildlife Habitat Council certifications on the 3 pilot sites, and we've gotten National Wildlife Federation certifications for all the other IVM locations. For a number of years, and this is another spin-off of the tours and conversations with the Maryland Park Service. For a number of years, I've talked with them about converting the management of rights-of-way on the electric transmission lines through state-owned lands to IVM. And they had other priorities. They didn't act on it. Well, a law was passed in Maryland that requires state agencies to have management plans for pollinators. When that happened, the superintendent of the Park Service came to me and said, "Hey, I think we want to talk about converting." So we've converted the electric transmission right-of-way vegetation management and state park, state-owned lands. A few years ago, it's 425 acres that we picked up on that. There's a couple of before shots. I don't have any after, but they go through a lot of really nice, pristine areas, a lot of hilly areas where IVM will really work out very well. I'm not going to dwell on this one too long, but Baltimore City, there's a very underserved area that where we mowed probably 5 times a year on a right-of-way. We decided it might be an opportunity to do something more with that right-of-way. So initially, we went to the community and asked if they wanted to do urban farming, community garden plots. For a variety of reasons, they turned that down. So we hatched the idea of converting that really sterile site to IVM and bringing in the nearby schools to do educational projects. And they conceptually liked that. We had a city councilman, we had the deputy director of Parks and Rec there, and we ultimately developed an MOU to convert the site. And one of the things we had to address was the 8-inch maximum grass height ordinance in the city. So we needed to include in the MOU a get out of jail free card if obviously the vegetation was going to be taller than that. So we did that. We thought we were going full speed ahead. Well, wouldn't you know it? So there's the site as it looked with the mowing, and there's the artist's rendering of what we would hope it would look like. Well, you see the paths. There are a lot of those paths on the left that happened over time with people traveling on them. As part of this deal, we thought we would upgrade those with gravel. Well, no good turn goes unpunished. The regulators decided that we need to have water control devices, and then the residents wanted streetlights. So I understand it's still kind of percolating right now. Hopefully it will get off a dead center, but obviously that jacked up the cost considerably, and it wasn't budgeted. But this would be a phenomenal program to get in the city in an underserved area where you could really do some good environmental education. So we converted a lot. We have pilot sites. We converted sites around the system. As I mentioned before, there were 2,200 acres now that have been converted. There's bee research going on, bird studies, soil biota studies. There's cover type change studies, and then the certifications. Basically it's a win-win for BG&E. It's a win-win for the stakeholders. It's a win-win for the environment. So concluding this part of the presentation, basically the lessons learned. And I can't say this enough. It's outreach, more outreach, and education. Meet with people ahead of time. You want to convert a site, if you're going to go in, find cooperators off the side, state parks, environmental areas, people who really embrace what you're doing on the right-of-way. Work with them first. But whatever you're going to do, and the lesson in Columbia was a very difficult situation initially. With the right outreach, the right education going out, you can get people to be your advocates, and that's really powerful. Develop partnerships when you get these sites, propose to do studies and research, because in doing that, you can not only convince more people about what you're doing, maybe you'll learn some things if you're not doing it quite right. And this is sort of a segue into my next part of the presentation, is about following the ANSI A300 standard, Part 7 IVM standard, follow the ISA IVM BMP, which, by the way, is starting to get underway to follow the changes that have recently been done to the A300 standard. And then evaluate the right-of-way stewardship accreditation model to see if that's applicable for what you want to do, because there are great benefits from that as well. So the next segment of this is talking about the IVM standards, A300 IVM standards, which were published in December. Anybody have copies yet? Anybody in here have? Okay, so there was a glitch on those. Full disclosure, one of the problems, we turned everything in. There's one person here who helped tremendously, Stan Verart. Stan did one of the segments in the annex, and unfortunately, so the annex is attached to the standard, and somehow they went in outer space and found some other annex that didn't really meet what we put together, and they published it, and we caught it sort of in time, but I forgot 60 or 90 copies they printed, and so the first 60 or 90 people get this kind of what we call bastardized taped in annex on there. So I apologize if you get one of those. That's what I have in my hand too. Anyway, the changes. We met for almost 2 years. There was this committee of really dedicated professionals. Stan being one of them, involved with it. And we had 2 public comment periods. And like people say, the changes are significant. And of course, one of the most significant changes is no longer a utility-only standard. It really can be applied anywhere. So we're really happy with that. And it's designed to be continuing, starting with the standard. The standard is sort of a high-level framework. The annex is like a white paper to the standard and also a bridge to the ISA BMP. And then we also try to align it with the right-of-way, the 10 principles, the right-of-way stewardship accreditation program, which tells you how to set up a program successfully and how to monitor for effectiveness. And then it aligns with the latest published research and the principles of IPM. Okay, so I'm going to breeze through here pretty quickly. One thing I want to touch on, 1.2.1, that standards can be used as a reference in specifications and in regulations, but it shouldn't be standalone. Hey, use ANSI A300 standards. You really need to use the standards, the framework of the standards, to add information, to flesh out more information in your specifications and your regulations, and that's what the standards are designed for. There's a specification writing guideline, Annex D, in the white paper in the annex. We took out, as I said, utility rights away. We streamlined the reasons for IVM, and you'll see the first one is what was in the former standard, and we took some of the meat out of that and moved it in a more appropriate place in the standard. We clarified or put more meat around who's the qualified vegetation manager, a qualified professional familiar with the science of ecosystem management, IVM practices. So we lined it up with the 10 principles of right-of-way stewardship accreditation. We changed the flow chart. I'm not going to go into this, but the one on the right is the new one. We added some new elements that are in the standard. And when you read the standard, always go to the flow chart first. It gives you a high-level snapshot of what the standard's about. The right of use is something else we fleshed out further to make sure you have the ability to implement IVM appropriately, that you can use chemicals if you need to, and that you can inhibit access for people who come in and really screw up what you're trying to do there. And we also added internal stakeholders to the mix for stakeholder engagement. If you're from a large organization, the more people in your organization know about the standard really can help you implement it. They can go to community meetings, they can write letters to the editor, they talk to their neighbors and friends. I won't go through this, I'm running out of time, understand, so we did add a management plan concept to it that really wasn't there before, that starts strategically, ends tactically. That was very important. I won't cover that one. A really important topic here is tolerance levels. Tolerance levels and plant pressure. Those are 2 new terms that were added. So we had action thresholds, which are when you should implement IVM. That's the ideal time. Say on a utility right-of-way, vegetation might be incompatible vegetation, 6 feet tall, 100 stems per acre. That's your threshold. Now we introduce tolerance levels, again, back to the utility model. If the closest under the federal regulations plants can get to the wires of 4.5 feet, then that would be your tolerance level. That's when you absolutely have to pull the trigger on doing the work. And then plant pressure, we introduced that to measure risk, and those are the elements that factor into what your threshold levels are and what your tolerance levels are. We added prescribed fire since it's no longer utility standard. Prescribed fire is much more fair game. Not that you can't do it on the utility line, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do. We added a physical header, a group manual, mechanical under that. We introduced the concept of facilitating biological controls, chemically facilitated biological controls, and we put in a caveat about prescribed fire, just so people in the community read this and go, oh, boy, I want you to burn the transmission right away. Well, no, you really can't. You can't necessarily do that. Adaptive management is another important thing that we expanded on, because it's really important when you do the work as part of IVM that you go back, you circle back, and you understand what you did, if you've done it right, and you make adjustments. And part of that we also put more emphasis on was keeping detailed work management records. If you don't have those, it's difficult to do your adaptive management appropriately. So in closing, basically the revised standards will open the door for IVM practices, and they can be implemented for any type of land use. It's no longer utilities, and it does follow the right-of-way stewardship principles for assessing how to set up a program, and how to measure its excellence. So we like to think it works. The flow is great now, includes a lot more useful information. And with that, I will end the presentation. Any questions? Yes.
How frequently is prescribed fire? Oh, sorry. How frequently is prescribed fire used in these situations? Mm-hmm.
Not frequently at all. We did it once. We did it twice at BG&E. Once at Patuxent as an experiment, and once in another environmental area, Serpentine area. And the work that you have to do to ensure that nothing gets out of control. I think it was Jack McCabe mentioned the ionization that can happen with particulates in the smoke that can cause an outage. So the engineers really frown upon that. So you have to do a lot of due diligence, a lot of homework to do any kind of burning on utility rights of way. Thank you.